Up and running now. Excuse me. So welcome to the Tuesday night Dharma gathering. And I hope this is working. I'm having some sort of technical issues here. So maybe you can, if you can hear me and see me, let's check in as we often do. And if you're new to this gathering, I'll walk you through that. But the first thing you want to do is, if you're seeing me and hearing me okay, open a second window in your browser. On that window, go to facebook.com/DavidNickturn, and you'll see the beginning of a stream of comments, and that's where you should put your comments and questions in. So if you could let me know that you're hearing me and seeing me okay, that would be very gratifying this evening. So I see, okay, yeah, good. And you can refresh that screen every once in a while. You'll see all the comments as they're gathering. Excuse me. Tony Fontana. Hi from Iran. It says Fran, but I wonder if you mean Iran. Been loving reading your Facebook comments. Okay. New to you since one time at Mandala Yoga in July 2014. Oh, hi from Fran. Okay. Tony and Fran. Been learning opening, got to get with the meditation. Thank you for trying to be a help. You're welcome. Good to have you here. Dan Crampton from Kalamazoo. Marie from Texas. Sarah from Chicago. And as Tony is pointing out, we're entering Mercury retrograde today, so that explains why I'm having these technical issues to start with. Mike Henderson from Nova Scotia, and Debstar Divine. So again, since we've had a little intermittent activity here, it looks like we're working pretty good now, so I'll remind you to go to a second window in your browser if you're seeing me and hearing me okay. And excuse me, go to facebook.com/DavidNickturn. in that window in your browser. Jenny, okay. Jenny, are we working okay? Seems like we are. She says better. Yes, and I did get that comment. Audio not good, big echo. Oh, and then I think you said it's better. Is anybody else experiencing that? Sometimes you just need to turn your volume down. So let's see who else is online. Is Priya's here, Laurel's here, and I take it now that we're sort of maybe have stabilized and we're up and running, so we'll start in a minute our gathering. Okay. Let's see. Very good. Okay, we'll get underway, and you can let me know if there's any problems as we go. Please let me know. So, start recording. Okay. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to our this recording is Ustream is not working that well. Well, hopefully we're up and running now. So this is our Tuesday night Dharma gathering, and this evening we're going to be talking about, the topic is called Sacred Embodiments. I'll explain what I meant by that as we go. And assuming now that everybody's up and running, and wow, okay. I'm sorry everybody, but I'm having problems here with this technology. Let's start again. Good evening, everybody. This is Tuesday Night Dharma Gathering. Tonight's topic is sacred embodiments. and we'll be taking a look at an aspect of the Vajrayana tradition that began in India, and particularly as it evolved in Tibetan Buddhism. I don't think the recording is working. Okay. As soon as I leave the page. Okay, well, it's possible that we're not going to get to record tonight. I think we're still broadcasting. And seems like Ustream's recording function is not operational. So let's give it a shot in any case to just at least have our conversation now. And hopefully we'll have better results as we go along. So, what is the topic of sacred embodiments? What does it mean? Well, let's give you a little example. Picture's worth 1,000 words. I have some friends visiting with us tonight. There's the Buddha. All right. Here, from the Hindu tradition, but also appears in Tibetan Buddhism, is Ganesh, one of my favorites. There we go. There's Ganesh. So who are these beings? And what do they represent? When you enter into a Tibetan Buddhist environment, the walls are covered with tankas, paintings of these deities, and also statues, and also in the Hindu tradition. So this is in sharp contrast, and I wanted to start by saying this is in sharp contrast to most of the Western religious or spiritual traditions, which come under the umbrella of monotheistic outlook, which is the notion that there's all these deities have been unified into a single sacred entity, most of the time usually called God, and with a capital G. And if you study the history of all these things, actually the pantheistic tradition or polytheistic tradition, which had many gods, maybe with a smaller g, as representing the sacred aspect of life. And so we look at that, and it's sort of not what we were used to seeing when we were growing up. There might be, when we went to church, there might be, or synagogue or wherever we went, there's a notion of a single unified deity. That's called monotheism. And in the Buddhist tradition and the Hindu tradition and other, sort of native traditions, there's this notion of the sacred world manifesting in a lot of different ways with different deities representing different aspects of the divine or the sacred world. So it's an interesting thing to contemplate as you move forward. This is what's happened is sort of some of the students I'm working with are moving forward into Vajrayana style of practice. You begin to become, you could say, introduced, to some of these deities. And so therefore it's helpful just to have some idea of what the concept is, what we're working with, and does it make any sense to our minds at all. So you know, it's interesting, if you go to a Christian church, like a Baptist church, they don't have any representations of deity. It's considered, you know, sacrilegious, actually. And similarly, in certain early Christian traditions, there was a kind of profound movement away from graven idols, you know, representations of deity in form. And yet in our tradition, the Buddhist tradition, they're all over the place. So it just struck me as entering this new year, I really wanted to sort of at least sow some seeds for thought and consideration going forward, and whether we're dealing with aliens from another planet, are we dealing with imagination at the human level, are we dealing with you know, another sort of dimension or aspect of the reality that we're living in, are we dealing with different aspects of our own mind and consciousness? These are all kind of things that you might come up with in terms of trying to relate to Ganesh or Tara or Avalokiteshvara or Manjushri or any of these deities that we work with in the Tibetan Tantric tradition. So I think you'll see, even if you're not doing it, it's going to be an interesting way of looking at how we structure our sense of sacred world. In other words, we might, if we're completely materialistic, we're neither pantheistic or monotheistic. We just simply say, look, there is just what there is. There's the material world, that's it. There's no other dimension that we could be sort of working with. So as you engage the notion of spirit, you know, just using the word spiritual, spirit, already the word spirit has the idea, and it's interesting, it's the same word as mind in French, l'esprit, has the notion of something less tangible, less form-dwelling, more etheric in terms of how it's experienced, right? So mind or spirit is by definition something that is less in the world of form, but connects to our world of form. So sometimes we would say, like, you know, in the New Age world, they'd say mind, body, spirit, you know, that these are sort of the levels of experience that we're having. Do we have any notion of this at all, or are we materialists? That's a good question. I'm not talking about necessarily just believing in, you know, life after death, just, you know, spirit, disembodied spirit. But just even now, as we're sitting here, do we have a notion of ourselves as purely material beings, some kind of chemical process producing thoughts in the brain, heart pumping blood, or is there some notion of something a little more ineffable or etheric in terms of our own consciousness right now? Like if we experience our mind right now, where is that? What is that? So it's a pretty powerful question, and sometimes I've said there's really only kind of two broad categories of ways of looking at these things in the world, and one is materialism and the other is kind of a spiritual outlook. And then there's combinations of those two. There's a what we call spiritual materialism, which is we've sort of converted the spiritual realm into a kind of supermarket, right? And the other would be that we could be completely nihilistic and say that you know, only matter is existing, or we could say there's some subtle interpenetration of mind, body, and spirit that is actually a sort of better description of our actual existence. So what does all this have to do with, if we come down to the human scale of life on Earth that we're experiencing, albeit fleetingly? And you know, it's sort of one view that we just have this brief moment, it's fleeting, we disappear at the end of that, there's no trace of any kind of relationship to a larger field of awareness or consciousness. That's fine, and as far as I'm concerned, by the way, any point of view is fine, but you have to be prepared to live it and stand by it. And that's why the human scale seems to have, a lot to do with having at least some kind of open mind or open heart towards exploring the reality that we seem to find ourselves waking up in the middle of. Like, boom, there you are. None of us really remember how we got here exactly. And probably the most poignant and kind of accurate notion of consciousness is that it's just appearing in the moment. If you just right now settle into your own being, there's a kind of a instantaneous quality to consciousness, just appearing. Within that, we have memories of having been other places before. We have projections of where we're going to be going next. But if you look with any kind of inquisitive mind, you'll see those are occurring within the realm of mind already. So all the narrative, all the memory, all the projections about the future, all the anxiety, all the enthusiasm is actually occurring within the realm of mind right in this very moment. Would you say that's true? Where else is it? And we seem to be walking through a world of the residue of past. It's pretty easy to reset our own mind and kind of come into a state of present awareness. But it's much harder, if it even vaguely is possible, to reset the entire seeming landscape and environment we're in, which seems to be the world of form that has accumulated tremendous solidness. And, I'm looking at it at Queens, there seems to be a residue of previous activities of other beings that we're looking at there. So, okay, Rebecca's back and the recording's working. Okay, great. Yeah, I don't know if it's recording it or not. It doesn't seem to indicate that it is, but let's assume that it is. So, this is an interesting point about these deities that we're talking about. I'm going to say quite a bit more about them. Is we say in Buddhism, and this is quite distinct in a way, that they arise from emptiness. That the forms themselves of even the deities, and in fact our own forms, arise from a kind of quality of space that is without causes and conditions. It just is kind of open. So sometimes we use the word primordial or unconditional space. Excuse me. If we've never sat still even for 1 minute, we will probably have no idea what I'm talking about right now. And even so, we might have no idea. But if we just hold our seat for a minute and just feel, where are we? Just what's going on. There's a quality of it that is free from the past and the future, right? So it just boom, just kind of like a sense of spontaneous, instantaneous awareness. So from that, everything arises. That's what we would say as good little Buddhist boys and girls. From that, unborn, everything arises. And even say samsara or confusion and wisdom, nirvana, arise from that unborn space. Now, when we have a sense of working with these deities, which we'll talk more about, it's very important to understand that in the Buddhist take on them, they are synonymous or completely made up of or arising from unconditional open space that has no characteristics, particularly no attributes and no form. So that's what we would call formless world. Mind, for example, consciousness, is essentially by nature formless. But because it's formless, myriad forms arise from it. For example, right now, I'm here, right? And then all of a sudden, anger arises. you know, and compassion arises, you know, curiosity arises. All those feelings, all those aspects of communication arise from the open space, and they dissolve back into it. When we understand that, nothing that arises is a problem for us, basically, because we haven't solidified those projections, we're not terrified of our own projections, and we're able to move through them or work with them in a creative way. That's the whole idea of the practices that we do. Stop being scared of our own mind, right? For example, in the middle of the night you wake up, maybe you've had a dream, also coming from the mind, and you perceive what you think is a snake in the corner of the room. Your mind has filled in all of the attributes of a snake, including fear, uncertainty. And then as your focus clarifies and you turn on the light and you look over there, it's probably turns out to be the sash from your bathrobe. Unless, of course, you live in the jungle and it turns out to be an actual snake. Which is still much better than your projections about it. Because you go, either I've got to move away from this, or I've got to capture it, or I've got to get help, or it's harmless, I can just pick it up and help it go back outside. But in our projection mind, we have a kind of unconscious relationship with the apparent form, and we're constantly running away from or towards our own projections. Lovers, murderers, everything. So it's very I'm sorry folks, I've had bronchitis, so I hope you can forgive me coughing every once in a while here. So we're really looking very carefully before we talk about any specific arising, what arises in space, as the nature of the mind as being open and clear and fresh. Within that space, think of that space like a crystal ball. That's why we use a crystal ball on the shrine sometimes. It's signifying that open, clear quality of mind. Within that space, all kinds of reflections can arise. You know, a memory of like a fight we had 3 nights ago is arising in that clear space of mind. If we are confused about the nature of that arising, we think it's happening now. All of our response is geared up to it happening now. And basically we have solidified and bought into our own projection, which is the world of form that most of us experience. So if we, in our mind, feel like we've been browbeaten and have nothing to live for, and that we hold those projections solidly, our body starts to shape, the world of form starts to shape around that type of consciousness. You can see like a dog that's been beaten, like that. So the world of form is contouring itself to the inner experience. Our consciousness is always, for the most part, generating forms, mental forms. And even you could say then our kind of quality as human beings is to bring those forms into tangible thing, have an idea for holding water, okay. We're making stuff, and first we imagine it, which is like this. My new favorite is this show Shark Tank, because people imagine something like, what if you had a container that could keep cold things cold and hot things hot. Wow, that's a mental arising form. You begin to visualize that form. Then you discover how to do that. You create a kind of insulation in the container. Then you go to the patent office and you patent it, and then you try to sell other people this idea that you've basically imagined, and now it's become real. So the important point about understanding deity practices is that it's mirroring a process that we are naturally doing all day long, every day, which is creating projections of mind, and then bringing them into some kind of tangible form. So if we think, for example, about, let's say we're having sexual fantasy, okay? Use that as an example. We've created a kind of mental projection of something that appears to be external to us. It's mirroring the quality of actually being external, but actually it's completely a mental form. And then we're creating a sort of schismatic duality between our own consciousness and the appearance of that seemingly projected form, and then we can crave that and relate to that. So you can see similarly, if we're very angry or upset with somebody, we create a mental form of us having an argument with them. And the more you meditate, the more these forms are seen to be empty. That if somebody is doing their practice, at a certain point they should begin to be able to see, not necessarily dispel because these habits are deeply ingrained, but to see that yes, this is a mental projection. That's exactly what it is. It's not a real experience. It's unfolding in the sense of something external. In the same way as our mind, using that dimension of ongoing imagining and projecting, we can either project phantasmagoric, horrifying, scary forms, which we do all day, every day actually. We create negative projections, negative fantasies, or at least painful ones. What's a painful projection? We project something maybe that we crave that's really not good for us, like a shot of heroin. And in our mind it gets very strong. And it even can become embodied, that our body appears to be sort of voting for the mental projection. So there's not such a big separation between mind and body at that level, but the whole engine of it is being used to create familiar mental forms. So the skillful means in the Buddhist pantheon is to begin to include within that imaginary mind sphere the projection of positive forms, or a higher quality of form. And in Tibetan we use this word la, L-H-A, above, something that's higher and more elevated, you could say, more uplifting. So we can imagine, and we do imagine, these deities that are really expressions of the best qualities that we have already within us. Tenderness, compassion, sharpness, clarity, power, right? And then we begin to tune our mind to that frequency. That's the sort of notion of the practice. And that is called, in the tantric tradition, sampanakrama, or creation stage. And we're actually participating actively, using our imagination to create a mental form that will shape our mind in a more positive, uplifted direction, and tune it to positive qualities that will be helpful for ourselves and helpful for others, and also take it away from the habit of creating harmful forms, scary forms, negative forms, confused forms. You see, your mind can only be doing one or the other. That's the beauty of it. And if we begin to discipline the mind to sort of cultivate a kind of, you could say, positive imagery within the mind. So of course in the West, modern Western culture, there's this sort of positive imaging which is not utterly dissimilar from what we're talking about. There's one maybe significant quality to add, which is within the tantric tradition, it's considered that these positive forms are actually part of the fabric of reality as it is. This is a kind of elusive notion that these beings are, of course, yes, projections of our own mind, as are we, by the way. That's what we are. But they also have some level of kind of relative reality that is quite substantial. So when we visualize certain empowered deities, and it's the guru's, the teacher's job to introduce us in the Vajrayana to these deities, when we visualize those deities, We're actually connecting with some part of reality that's empowered and actually, you could say, at a relative level, existing in very much the same way that we are existing. And they're also non-existing in very much the same way that we're not existing, which is we're not solid and we're not fixed beings. So it begins to reveal something of our own nature. We've assumed certain things about our own nature, our own solidity, for example, even though as we begin to experience ourselves in a meditative way, we see that we're kind of liquid, we're kind of light, we're sort of energetic beings, and it can take a lot of different shapes and forms, and it can change. So the deities is an expression of a kind of dimension of our own consciousness, of our bigger field of awareness, in which the sacred form, or the kind of uplifted form, has become somewhat stable. You know? So if somebody has stability and compassion, it doesn't waver because this is a difficult situation. If they have insight and wisdom, it doesn't waver because all of a sudden the situation seems to be hectic or confused. So these qualities, you could say, are slightly more permanent, if you want to use that kind of way of talking about it. They can be stabilized. And it's not so much the storyline or the concept, but the very essence of it, of the experience, it has become stable. So the deities, you could say, are holding these qualities in a kind of unconditional way. And that brings us to the second tier of where they come from, which is they come from the fabric of reality itself, and awakened beings can see them and communicate with them, and do. So this is a fine line between defining imagination and tuning into the fabric of the reality that we're in. And they're interactive. So if I want to say that, in case you're thinking about this, it's absolutely my recommendation, but not just mine, but the whole lineage, saying that if you read, and the reason I'm talking about this in a public forum is because you can read about it. I would say if you want to tune into this aspect, maybe Reggie Ray, Indestructible Truth is a very good book, or Secrets of the Vajra World. You know, Dr. Ray kind of really outlined some of these for Western people to kind of chew on what's being talked about there. But if you want to practice them, you simply must get initiation and empowerment from an authorized holder. Otherwise, the whole thing will be like basically unplugging your television from the wall, and starting to walk around the room with it and wondering why you're not getting a clear picture, or any picture for that matter. So there's a connection to the lineage of awakened beings, and this is kind of a very powerful form of introduction, and it's always done by an authorized teacher to an authorized student, and it's always held, the essence or inner part of it is held to be secret teachings, or inner teachings. So I want to distinguish between us talking about it in a general way, because some of you are approaching this whole area of participating in Tibetan Buddhist practice, coming from a culture that has no support, no understanding of any of these principles. So it's quite a leap. And in that spirit, I'm just trying to illuminate, and there's other books you can read that illuminate it, what exactly is being worked with there and what isn't. So we can tune our minds to this frequency, and we're given this frequency by the excuse me, by the teacher. And you have to be very mindful. It's considered really dangerous, you could say, to start working with these kind of practices on your own. Every kind of warning is given to not do that. So, having framed it that way, that brings us to the role of the teacher in the Vajrayana, or the guru. Is the teacher empowers your connection, your relationship with whatever deity is being introduced, That's called an abhisheka, or an empowerment. It's actually introducing you to that deity. And then you're authorized at that point to begin a practice which is usually called a sadhana practice, in which you're empowered to visualize that deity as much as you can, and tune your mind in, train your mind in to the qualities of it, the energy of it. So it might embody confidence, or you might, in Tibet, one of the most prominent ones is Avalokiteshvara, which is the bodhisattva of compassion. Everybody's walking around saying Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra that's associated with that. And maybe you're visualizing it and repeating the mantra with, more subtle instructions. So without that empowerment, all we're doing is really talking about the theory of this, okay? And then let's say maybe it's somewhere in your future. It's part of the view section of the program. What is, because you're seeing these things and you go, what the heck is this? I thought I'd show you a samsaric deity, just to see that the principle is universal. Right? It's very similar in a weird kind of way. Emmy. Her name is Emmy. So, and she's got wings, and she's holding up the world. So maybe this is like a creativity deity. But these principles are not unique, but they're kind of more universal. We're tapping into, if you did the mantra of the Emmy, it's equivalent to calling up all your friends and getting them to vote for you. It's kind of samsaric version of the Hla, and not all bad. There's some healthy dimension to it, but it really, to the extent that it's just feeding the ego clinging and wanting more of that, it's a very different path, wouldn't you say? Sort of more materialistic. But we can represent anything in the form. So here's Tara again, just to sort of feel the difference between those two. So if we were empowered to do Tara sadhana, we might use the form or painting to kind of help us tune into that. And the point is that our sampanakrama, or creation stage, connects with a fulfillment stage, or utpadakrama, in which the actual qualities of that deity, the actual sort of, you could say, existence of it, our imagination and that connect up. It's like our vision and reality connect. We aspire, and then we are met, connecting. So it's a very subtle way of looking at the world, but if you look at the world as alive and full of energy, which it's so easy to do, like in the country, in a place like Maui, you feel there's energy, spirit in everything around you. And that's the pantheistic view. It's all alive, and it's not just alive as one mushy, all one thing. It has tremendous articulation and detail and specificity to different aspects. You could say a mountain and a stream are one, but that's completely missing the particularities of those two things. Each has its own magic, its own, you could say, deity. In Tibetan we call them dralas, its own energy. You can connect with that. Your consciousness is meant to, as a human being, to connect with that. We're meant to connect with the energy of the world and the natural world. So if you see the world as alive and kind of vibrant, it's much easier to tune into this kind of pantheistic view of things. What happened, just to give a brief history tale, is that people in smaller groups, of course, developed relationships with their own local deities and created a kind of special feeling for them about that. And as cultures came together in larger configurations, you have the idea of sort of umbrella deity, mono deity. So all the little local deities can come together and fuse, and now we don't have to have a war between these different tribes. That's what happened in the Arab world. That's what happened in Europe. It's a very interesting thing to understand, that people had their own sort of relationship to their own sacred local energies. So it's tricky, because if you try to tune into deities from another culture, like the Hindu culture or the Buddhist culture, and you're coming from a non or monotheistic culture, there's not going to be you have to be reintroduced to those energies, because you didn't grow up thinking, yeah, there's this Drala there, or there's a deity in this particular mountain pass. So the concept has to be laid first, and then we have to sort of retrain our sense perceptions so that we're more open to the specificity of sacred energy all around us. And that's the challenge for Western Tantra, my friends. It's a shift in how we look at the world, and the two obstacles to it are a hardcore monotheism, which is kind of rigid, clumping everything together, and the other obstacle is too much science, because that becomes our kind of outlook, is that there's a reason for everything, and we never taste the magic of we know what water is, we know when it boils, we know that it's turns into steam, or if we make it colder, it turns into ice, but we don't really know what water actually is from a scientific point of view. There's nowhere it says what water is. There's nowhere it says what mind actually is, and those are those sciences are given their own zone, and then of course then in the world of modern physics we return to a place where we recognize that we don't know what anything is. We can give it names and forms and characterizations till we're dropping dead, but we don't know what it actually is. So and that it can't be completely contained by concepts that we have about it. So this is a kind of new, as far as I'm concerned, contemplating this, I don't think it's a layup or an easy trip for Western people to just dive into this realm. Some people have such a strong karmic connection to Asian culture or whatever, it feels like they're returning. All my kirtan friends, I think they feel like they're from India more than they feel like they're from Long Island or Brooklyn or wherever. And my Tibetan Buddhist friends, we might feel like we're like so akin to that culture, but the truth is we weren't raised that way in this lifetime. And for most of us, there's a kind of a leap into a different way of looking at things. I think it's very important to get the view, to understand some of the framing that's involved with looking at the world in a particular way, and then you can jump into the experience, or vice versa, whichever way. But that was the intention here, to go a little bit into this. I think we would have to have another session to go much deeper in. So what I'd like to do for now is encourage anybody who's watching, if you want to participate, and you haven't yet, open a second window in your browser, go to facebook.com/DavidNickturn. And there you're going to see the kind of stream of questions, and I'll try to address some of those, or comments, and we'll see how far we get. We have another 15 minutes or so to have a little discussion about this. And I realize this is a big topic and quite a leap for us, but it came into my mind that way, so we're going to do it. Okay. So please, if you would, right now, go ahead and lay your questions in, and let's see if we can have a juicy conversation about this. And please, no question is irrelevant, or comment if it's sincerely offered. So far, okay, Deb started by saying, "Oh no, poor David, I have some hot water Have some hot water with lemon and honey. Hope you feel better soon. Thank you. Mike Henderson is saying, I would put that Emmy on a chain and wear her around my neck everywhere. That is an interesting idea, to have a smaller version of it. You could do that. This is awards. This is our version, by the way, of deity season now. All these statues are being offered in the entertainment world, and they've decided to just completely compress it and see how much uplift they can create, towards being recognized for being a talented person. So good luck with all of that, you see. People shape their minds around that. Mind is, again, shapeable into various types of experience. So let's see if anybody's coming up with anything brilliant here yet. Okay, Sarah. I don't know, Sarah, if you say Cadillac or Catalic. So either way. Do you think there is still a benefit in deity practice without the empowerment of an authorized teacher? Can mantra work or envisioning these deities still help me to get closer to these specific deities and their corresponding goodness? So that's a good question, Sarah. I tried to answer that. To do the formal practices, sadhana practices, there's no doubt in my mind that what's prescribed in the Buddhist tradition is absolutely get the empowerment from an authorized teacher. Otherwise, it's almost for sure that you're going to go rolling down the wrong hill, and even creating something that's counterproductive, possibly. If we're not understanding emptiness right, if we're not understanding the technique right, the guru or the empowered teacher really knows the deity, the quality of it, and the essence of it. So it's like, otherwise you're on a blind date. How those worked out. I guess sometimes they work out okay, but this is like getting a proper introduction. Having said that, though, having these forms around your house, if something appeals to you, like I love that Ganesh. I haven't been introduced to Ganesh through a formal teaching. Ganesh appears in some of the other sadhanas I've done, so I feel some connection there. But I'm not chanting Ganesh's mantra and trying to visualize Ganesh. But if there's a natural kind of presence and communication, absolutely okay. You have a tanka in your house, or a rupa, murti of Ganesh, and maybe you read about it and maybe have a little conversation going on. But I would say before launching a really deep formal practice, myself, I would always recommend getting a proper connection, initiation, so that you have the right deal going there. So I hope that answers that question okay. And it's okay to talk about this too, because as I said, I'm trying to clarify some of what this is and what it isn't. So let's see if you have any questions or comments, now would be the time to. God, I just saw a picture of Priya has a picture of Shamdas, who passed away 2 years ago. Most of you know who he was, but that was weird to see him there. Let's see what else. Kathleen Sullivan. So David, by the way, if you're watching this in the archives, if we've been successfully able to record it, obviously you can't ask questions. So, but I'm trying to read the questions so you know what people who are participating online are thinking about. And please write yours in now, if you have any. So David, are other depictions of, say, compassion considered valid? If a person decided that compassion looked like a peaceful lake or her mother, does visualizing that work in the Buddhist sense? Excuse me. Great question. And, sometimes I know sort of holistic doctors, let's say somebody's dying, and they're trying to get them to settle their mind and be at ease. They might visualize a lake or a place they were in as a child. So the process of visualization, as I said earlier, is something that's going on all the time. We're always visualizing something. It's very helpful to understand that the mind is fundamentally open and clear and empty, but we have most of what's occupying our attention and awareness is visualizations, little movies, you could call them, and we don't even know how they got there, and we also are completely, enthralled with them and kind of living inside of them as if they're real. So if you understand that, the power of imagination, sure, you know, you could explore, but as I said, these visualizations, these deities are empowered by having been really seen, you could say, at a certain level of reality. They're not absolutely real, and nor are we absolutely, permanently, unconditionally real. We already covered that in a million talks so far. So in the sense of the deity being a really authorized or empowered, you know, version of the compassion or whatever, but it is still cultural. The deity in you know, for compassion in Tibetan Buddhism is going to be different than the one in the American Indian tradition, but they're going to have similar quality probably. So sure, yeah, I mean, why not? But I think before we crank up too much, like, okay, I'm visualizing a lake and spending hours and hours visualizing a lake, myself, I would go more towards a kind of tradition in which there's a lot of body of knowledge about how to go about doing those kind of things, and the right mantras and the right seed syllables and the right, you know, it's like having the key to a lock, you know, somebody gives you the key. You can try to open that door on your own, but having a key is, you know, the way I like to go about those kind of things. So, but explore your world by all means in terms of, like, if this principle seems interesting, just take a look at how your mind works. If you're thinking of, like, I'm thinking of a tidal wave right now. That has a lot of power, you know. I like the power of a tidal wave because it sort of annihilates anything in its path. So it's kind of one good way to get to kind of like emptiness. Have your mind washed away by a tidal wave. But it's scary, right? So then you think of a placid, beautiful turquoise lake, you know, and your mind will take that shape. Your mind is basically taking the shape of whatever you imagine. And we could just start, I think for tonight, if we just started noticing that happening, that would be really a great start. Just notice how your mind takes shape. You see what I'm saying? Okay, Rebecca. Oh wait, no, let's see. That's from before. Okay, so if you have any questions or comments, we have just a few minutes left to tackle them. So go to David Nichtern at facebook.com. Facebook.com/David Nichtern, separate window in your browser. Sarah Katalak, I'm sorry, Sarah, if I'm mangling your name, I apologize. Thank you, that helped a lot. Good, okay, great. Ari Summerlin, hey everyone, made it home, listened in for the whole thing, and had a basic question. If we're drawn to a deity or want to work with one, where do we look for the teacher to give us the empowerment? Thanks. Okay, and she has another question that she's going to email later. So where do we look? I would look for somebody who's connected to the deity that we're sort of drawn to. And, you know, I think people have had very powerful experiences seeing these kind of representations, sometimes of having their mind kind of caught. And, you know, if it's from the pantheon of Shambhala or from sort of classic Vajrayana Buddhism, I would look to find a classic Shambhala or Vajrayana teacher that clearly was empowered themselves to talk in these terms and present. So anybody who has a specific question about that, I can answer that specifically if you want to email me, davidnichtern@gmail.com. I would steer you, hopefully, in a direction that would be helpful. So here's Rebecca. So while on retreat, I was scheduled to be on dish rota for my very last night at Karma Chuling, and that means missing the protector chants and the closing chants in the shrine room. Ha ha ha. The head server who scheduled me was very upset that he scheduled me out of the shrine room for my last night. Kept insisting that I do the chants. This would mean less help for the kitchen. I just told him it made no difference to me. I held my heart and told him if it isn't right in here, then where is it? If it isn't right in here, then where is it? Oh, I see. Pointing to your heart. I went to the kitchen for the night, and it was delightful to simply wash dishes in silence. I feel we are simply recognizing and reminding ourselves of our own qualities when we are visualizing or chanting or calling on these deities. Ultimately, absolutely true. So then it's just a relative situation of like where would be the best place for you to practice that night. You know, I see an argument for both sides on it, like finishing out the formal practice with the group and also taking it out into the field. Ultimately, you know, Rebecca Kensei Rinpoche said a very special thing while everybody was still in Tibet. He told Trungpa Rinpoche, he said, in the future, they foresaw that Tibet was going to fall. And he said, in the future, we're going to have to carry our monasteries around on our backs because we're not going to have this luxury of having all this form. And of course, we're recreating opportunities like karma chilling for people to experience the form, but, you know, the protector energy can be conjured in the kitchen, absolutely, and should be. But it's very intense in the shrine room, and especially if a lot of people are practicing together. So I think you could take it either way. There would be, you know, kind of veracity on both sides of that, of what your what the teacher was saying and your feeling about it. And then eventually you know, as we say, you pays your money and you takes your choice. You know, that's what we're all doing anyhow. Let's see. But thank you for that comment. Okay, let's see if there's any last question we can go to before we break. Martha McGuire. Aspects of reality and energy personified is not such a leap for me to take. Great. And especially if we can look at it that way. That's why I said this is a sort of view talk. As long as there's no attachment to the sculptures. And science is the ultimate understanding of reality, not in conflict. Vajrayana is so ornate. Well, there's a couple of different comments there. Yeah, all these things, I think the main thing is all these things can come together. Science is also ornate. Science is also simple. Vajrayana is very ornate, for sure. Also very simple. Nature of mind. You know, everything converging to a single point. Unconditioned primordial mind is very simple, but it's easy to miss, you know. So the world is at once on a dot, and it's got enormous elaboration. We're like that too. We're very simple, and we have enormous complexity. So for myself, I think, you know, you can approach from the west and you can approach from the east. And most of the good practitioners I know are ambidextrous in that regard, and they understand the forms and the subtlety and the ornateness of it, and also the directness and simplicity of the essence of it. So I think that's a good, you know, place to end. I just want to mention again some of the events coming up. Tomorrow night, you can see these, by the way, on go to davidnickturn.com and go to the schedule. You see the next 4 weeks I'm out amongst the people, not in my crazy little house with a television screen, a computer screen. And I want to see as many of you as I can if I'm in your hood. So tomorrow night we're doing a talk. I think there's still a few openings left for that in Mount Kisco. And you can look up for the specifics on the website. Friday I'm flying to Cleveland at Evolution Yoga. Creativity, spirituality, and making a buck, integrating all those things. There's room. Please come, and if you're in the Ohio area, please come and join us. Week after that, Kripalu, getting a great group together for that Taming the Mind workshop. Some of you, I've met some of you there doing that workshop. And it ends in time for you to go home and watch the Super Bowl, if you care. And then the weekend after that, Empowered Yoga in Wilmington. Teacher training, meditation teacher training, level 1. If you have any ideas about wanting to transmit your understanding and clarifying kind of how to go about that, that's what that program is for. Also a very good introduction. And then finally, the following weekend, which is February 13th to 15th, annual traditional Shambhala training level 1 with me and number 1 son Ethan Nickturn co-teaching. Those have been really a love fest, a lot of fun for us, and that's January 13th to 15th at New York Shambhala Center. Then, friends, I am off to Thailand for a month, and when I come back, we're gonna introduce this new program, which is going to be 2 or 3 hour workshops that we're going to do together with a smaller group or whoever wants to sign up for it, including meditation practice, more in-depth conversation, going back and forth, and more detailed instruction. So that looks like the plan. We'll also be doing some of these. But for the next 3 weeks, I'll be right here every Tuesday night. If you have any topics you want me to go into, let me know. And thank you all so much for participating, and I hope you have a great night as Mercury careens into retrograde. Read your contracts carefully. Clean up old business. Be mindful.